geographically. And so the reason they got into the dairy farming partially was because they came from that in Norway and Sweden. And they kind of brought that with them. So that started in 1886. That's how far back we go. They established a homestead there. And part of the family went off into the lumbering business. And some of the friends and relatives went into the fishing. And farmers were needed in that community to provide their product for the folks that were in the lumber industry and the fishing industry. So that's how my family got their start in the dairy industry up there. And I think, goodness, I think right up until date today, I'm sure that we've been dairying right along all the way through. I started milking when I was 6 years old. We had families back then that grew up on raw milk. They quit farming and they realized that they needed the product of the farm. And so it was a different concept back then. That's what you did. You just got milk from the farm. I'll back up a little bit. I farm with my wife Heidi, my three children. My daughter Lindsay does all the milking. She's 36. I have a son that's 12 that handles quite a few of the chores on the farm. And then my little girl 10, she takes care of a lot of her chores. About 12 years ago, I thought there were so many people that thought we should have a dairy in our county, a large-scale dairy that would process the dairy products like conventional dairies. And I bought into that concept for a while. We were going to receive substantial grants from the state, from the federal government, to put in a very, very large dairy plant. And for some reason, I bought into that concept. And for other reasons I won't mention, it never took off. But during that time, I had so many good people that were buying milk from me that wondered why I was going into that kind of a dairy, where you would process your dairy products. And quickly I realized that, why in the world would I do that? You get your milk at Walmart, or the grocery store. And right about that time, my daughter was working while going through college studying dairy science. She was working on a large 2,000 cow dairy that was injecting BST growth hormones. And she started sharing that with me. And just for folks that don't understand what the growth hormone does, it enhances milk production and it causes all kinds of side effects, cancer, tumors, obesity. And she called me up one night. She says, "Dad," she says, "I'm pumping these cows with steroids, BST growth hormones." And she said, Minnesota average cow produces 15 to 18,000 pounds in her lactation. And she said, our cows are putting out 56 to 58,000 pounds of milk. And she said, the problem is, she said, the truck is in once a week with heifers from California or wherever hauling out these brand new cows that finished up a 9-month lactation. They're full of tumors, cancer, obesity. The cows are sick, they're dying. That did it for me. I just realized, you know what, I'm not going to get into this conventional dairy. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. The good people that came to me and said, you know what, if you're going to start processing your milk, you can't buy your milk. So I thought, I'm going to step into it in a bigger way, and I'm going to produce unprocessed dairy products. So we went into it with that concept. We have a humble little dairy that's a self-serve. We have 2 farms, the original homestead, and then the farm that I'm on, my grandfather bought in 1946. So I farm just about 500 acres. I raise all my own crops. The only thing I need to purchase from the outside would be oyster shells for my chickens and salt for the cows. Otherwise, I raise all my own grain. So it's entirely off the farm, everything we do. So we produce raw milk, skim milk, whole milk, yogurt, beef, pork, eggs, and it's just a small operation. I think 65% of our dairy products go back here to the cities. The people down here, the professional world, they've just realized that they need healthy products. And It's hard in the state to get healthy products. I have a good friend, Michael Hartman, who produces the same thing. He's got a huge waiting list. People can't get his product. It's just a growing industry. So I think that's part of the reason why so many of the folks that come up for vacation into their cabins take their dairy products back to Minneapolis. And I'm very committed to these people. But as things went along, we had some surprises. The state got wind that we were producing a raw dairy product, and we had a little retail store that was selling these products. And 5.5, 6 years ago, we had a visit from 3 inspectors, and they had an administrative court order to come in and inspect us or attempt to shut us down. They tried to shut us down. It's been an ongoing battle ever since. We've had great legal representation. Farmer and Consumer Legal Defense has been supporting us. Weston Price, our attorney that represents us in Minnesota here, has been a fellow by the name of Zenith Bear. He's done an outstanding job. He continues to work with us. We were at an appellate hearing, I guess it was 2 years ago or last fall. Yeah. And not so successful. I think the battle just continues. My good friend Greg Gens is going to speak to that effect here in a few minutes. But the state has started in on us again. February they came unannounced and went through their formality of inspection, and they were back a second time in March, and we've received letters from the State Attorney General's office, Assistant Attorney General, that they do not recognize the Constitution, and they're going to shut us down, and that's all there is to it. And I guess my message tonight for everybody here is to be thinking about who they elect for state officials, whether it's Attorney General's position, congressmen, senators, state representatives. Think about who you're voting for, who you're putting into office. I can tell you that the fellow that's running for state attorney general this fall, a guy by the name of Doug Berglund, sounds like he is very supportive of these efforts. Freedom of choice is what he's after. And I would encourage people to look him up, see what he's representing, and I believe he's a great candidate. I'm going to support him. And I think it starts with these people, elected officials, if we're going to get anywhere with any of our causes. And I guess that's probably my message. What else to say? We intend to continue. I'm in this battle not for myself, but for the consumer. I have a great deal of folks, quite a list of people that support my dairy, and others in the state, and other causes that you people represent here tonight. And I guess if a farmer like myself doesn't take a stand and represent the good of the people, the freedom of choice, then where do we go? And I guess that's where it's at. It's going to take everybody getting together to discuss the issues, understand legal procedures, legislature. We all need to get involved in this. We all know that, I guess. But yeah, I'm going to turn this over to Greg, and he can fill you in on some of the other details that are happening. If you have questions, we can meet after. If you have questions now, you can go ahead.
I'm just curious, what reason are they giving for shutting it down?
That's a great topic. Obviously, our state uses the reasons that on processed dairy products, I exaggerate a little bit, but they are telling us that it will kill you. And in some of the early legal documents that were drafted by the state, they were very, very concerned of that subject. Great illness, you're going to die from, I'm 60 years old, I've been drinking raw milk since I was a baby. And we have to prepare our cows for milking like you would be if you were going into surgery. And that's how I prepare my cows. I have to. If I'm going to sell milk, and I don't call it the public, I sell milk to willing consumers. And those people are welcome to come to my farm, which they do. My farm is open. I don't carry a liability insurance. I don't have insurance on a thing on my farm. And I have people from all over the country stopping in. They tour the farm, they watch us milk, they get in on milking, they buy dairy products, they're behind us, they believe in it. And I don't believe for 1 second it has anything to do with health. It's the big farmers. I'll just share a quick story. Well, I did share that story. We milk between 20 and 25 cows. The big dairies today, the largest dairy in Minnesota is 144,000 cows.
A day?
A day. 144,000 cows. Indiana, there's one at 32,000, and up in Idaho, 45,000. And then let's think of this. In California, there's the largest raw milk dairy producer. He milks 6,000 cows. And he's got, I don't know how many hundreds of acres of rotational grazing, but he does a fine job of producing it. It's sad that it's got to be such a large operation, but I guess it's so big that he's got it scaled down in different categories like a small farmer. So I understand he's a very good farmer. But if we're going to sell raw milk, we have to be clean. We are clean. We're conscientious about our customers, making sure they get a clean product. Looking back at the state's notes that they send me each time they do an inspection, I think I'm pretty proud of my farm. I think we do a good job. It looks nice. We're clean. But there's nothing we do that passes inspection. And I just think that the big farmers and other organizations want to end small farms. Apparently the country is in favor of fraudulent organic farming and 200,000 acres soybean and corn and 500 or 5,000 cow dairies. I guess that's what they want. But there's a good group of people out there that are going after quality food, and I think it's time for people to wake up, take their head out of the sand, and look every direction. That's why I say we need to look into who's representing our states at every level. So I'm going to let Greg cover some of that stuff. And thank you for having me. I'm sure when I get down, I'll remember some of the other things I wanted to share with you. But that's it for now.
And I got involved with David's story back in, was it 2013 when they came up? And at the time I was a sheriff deputy in the county that David lives in. I did policing for 15 years, 13 years were right here in Minneapolis, and I moved up to that northern corner of Minnesota and was a deputy for 2 years. And then I decided to stay home and raise my kids. But the last 6 months I was there, David came in and informed us at the Sheriff's Department that he believed the state was trespassing on his property because they had come up after he told them not to come on his property and done this unattended inspection. What I'm going to do tonight is try and give you a 30,000 elevation view of what's gone on in Minnesota and what's occurring with David and all of us, because what David talked about, that this is not just a farm or farmer issue, but this is a consumer issue all the way, so it affects everyone in Minnesota, not just the small farmer. Starting back in 1905, the first inspection statute on farms where cows are milked was passed. It talked about that any person that milks a cow, at that time person was defined in Black's Law's dictionary as a corporation, association, or partnership, not an individual man, not an individual woman. It recognized that they were not gearing their inspection actions towards private people. People in a single-tier relationship agreeing to trade goods. That's not where it was supposed to be. And in 1907, the state had passed some licensure laws about farmers selling things, actually everybody selling things, and they tried to apply it to a farmer that was going door to door, actually in Minneapolis. And the citizens of the state in 1907 decided that they didn't want their farmers licensed in that way. And Minnesota, to this day, is the only state that actually has an amendment to our Constitution that says, any person may sell or peddle the products of the farm or garden occupied and cultivated by him without obtaining a license therefor. So basically what happened in 1907 is the people spoke and said, our private farms selling to private people in a single-tier relationship are not going to be licensed. Fast forward to 1949. 1949 was the time in which Minnesota and many other states around the country before and after had decided that they were going to impose legal, mandated pasteurization on all milk that's sold in a third-party transaction in retail stores and similar. Some states went away from raw milk altogether. Our state decided that in 1949 they were going to remove the regulation governing raw milk for human consumption, which had a bacteria count regulation of 15,000 parts per million. Raw milk for human consumption. They removed that statute. Remember this, it's very important, they deregulated raw milk for human consumption. And they replaced it with a statute that stated the only place that raw milk can be secured or purchased by the consumer, was the word it's used, the consumer, would be the place in which the animal was milked, the private farm. So at that point in 1949, they had that regulation on human consumption of raw milk, 50,000 parts per million. In 1953, it had gone away, and the only place you could get raw milk anymore was from the farm where it was milked. The cow was milked. So they had recognized the threshold of the private farmer and the private consumer doing business with them. Now we'll fast forward to about 20 years ago. There's a farmer in southern Minnesota named Mike Hartman, which is really the founder of this fight. He's been fighting it for 20 years. This MDA, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, has tried to shut him down. And they have not been able to this day. Luckily, Mike knew Mike Hartman. And when the state approached David, David knew what he needed to do. He needed to come in and talk to us. He needed to exert his rights. And he had a lot of constitutional arguments about why the state could not do what they were doing. After all, raw milk in Minnesota, and it's not in every state, is legal to purchase and consume. But the MDA has a desire to regulate. Why do they have a desire to regulate? Well, though, as most of us probably understand, those regulatory bodies work hand in hand with the industries in which they regulate. The industry of pasteurized milk doesn't want 5% or 3% or 2% likely going to raw milk farmers that are doing their own things and can often make more money than selling to a creamery. So the laws that are on the books for grade A, grade B dairies are stringent. They require very expensive equipment to produce that pasteurized milk. And what happened in David's case is the state came in 2013 on an inspection report, which, by the way, what I did for David was I was his friend. I left law enforcement, which allowed me to be able to talk about these things in a legalistic fashion, which I wouldn't be able to do by statute previously. And I started a blog, honestly, with the technical assistance of my wife. But give credit where credit's due. But I started writing about what was going on in his court cases. And I did that because I was not employed by him, I was a friend, I could do it for him, whereas he couldn't legally because he was in the court case. So the blog is called supportlakeviewnaturaldairy.org. If you want to read about what happened throughout his court case. We haven't put anything on for about 9 months until it went to the Supreme Court and they declined to hear it. But what occurred from basically 2013 through 2017, I believe it was May of 2017, They came in and told David, stop. The law says that that the consumer can only secure or purchase on the occasional basis raw milk. That word occasional is what they hung their hat on. But if you look at the statute, it only talks about the consumer. It says nothing about the producer. So the state was trying to widen the net of this one statute that talks about raw milk in our state. It went through district court, which after about over a year of different hearings, the district court case had whittled down all of these statutes that the state wanted to impose on David that are for grade A and grade B dairies, those industry dairies. And they wanted to impose them all on David, and the court found, nope, there's only two that talk about inspection of cows. One, all the state could do to David if he interfered or refused was to remove his grade A or grade B dairy license. Unfortunately for the state, David had no grade A or grade B dairy license. No contract with the state. And the judge said that he was very disturbed by this statute that they're imposing upon him, and he believed that, unfortunately for our case, for David's case, that it did allow the state to come onto his farm, but had no teeth if he refused. The other statute was food handling, about being able to inspect any place that produces foods or packages them. And that is for products that go into commerce. Now here's what the state used. And I'm trying not to get in the weeds here again. I could stand up here for hours and talk about this stuff, and it's just from my law enforcement career that I understand these laws and was able to put this out there for David, so I'll try to make it quick. But basically, what the state uses to get on David's property within these statutes is something called an administrative inspection order, and many of you may be familiar with this. What it is it's not a search warrant, but it's a lesser degree needed of evidence that if these statutes are out there and you're conducting yourself in a closely regulated industry, you have to be conducting your behavior in a closely regulated industry, an administrative inspection order can just be basically signed by a judge, and they have the right to come on your property if you previously refused. Well, the problem for the state is, in my view, there is no raw milk producer in this country anymore that is participating in a closely regulated industry. Because raw milk, especially in Minnesota, like I told you about that regulation, 50,000 part per million bacteria count that was taken off the books in 1953, previously there in 1949, it's been deregulated. Not only that, but the industry that all the statutes are geared towards decries the production of raw milk. The pasteurized milk industry doesn't agree with it at all. That is the pervasively regulated, closely regulated industry that all the statute talks about. But what the state has done in their desire to regulate is they've tried to open up the net. They've tried to widen that net so that they can have control over any milk production in the state. But unfortunately, with that court case, it came down to two statutes, and that was it. Our case went to the Minnesota Appellate Court. They declined to hear the constitutional arguments, just as the district court did, of due process, violations of search and seizure upon David, because we didn't believe that the AIOs were correct for the behavior of producing raw milk. And it went to the Minnesota Supreme Court, and they declined to hear it. So we were stuck with the two statutes that allowed them onto the property, but that's all the court case decided, was just that they could simply come onto the property. That was it. Nothing about what they could do after, or if they could impose anything, even though they had told us in 2013 that he had to stop all production of all unpasteurized products. Again, legal products in Minnesota. So we kind of waited, right? Figured out what's their next move. And in 2017, I got to back up one point here quick. The state tried to define the farm, David and Heidi's farm, as a dairy plant. And if David's farm was defined as a dairy plant, all those hundreds of statutes would apply to it. However, for the state, unfortunately not for their benefit, there was an exception at the end of the dairy plant definition, which said, except a farm. It literally said that in the statute. Yet, they, for some reason had a problem reading that part and continued to want him defined as a dairy plant. That is one of the successes that they had in the district court, is the judge said, well, no, he's not a dairy plant. It says right there in the statute, except a farm. So we've gone through, that's basically what limited to those two statutes. In 2017, we were just laying low, not posting on the blog, didn't want to poke the bear. And the dairy products statute, chapter 32 in Minnesota, was rewritten. It was probably attached to an omnibus bill, something that there's no ability for us to keep an eye out for all those bills going through, bills being attached to other bills. And the state rewrote and created some new definitions for us. The dairy plant definition suddenly did not include an exception for farms. It also defined what a dairy farm was, any place where a hoofed animal is milked. It also defined milk, which previously was only defined by a code of federal regulation, which had to be ultra-pasteurized or pasteurized, and that's what Minnesota state law defined as milk. Well, they redefined milk. Any lactose secretion free of colostrum. So now it covers raw milk. So basically what happened in 2017 is the entire 3-year case, however long it took from beginning to end, was absolutely nullified by some regulators that weren't elected by anyone. And were probably given some definitions to a legislature saying, hey, we just need to clean this up. Don't look here. We'd appreciate you to do this. Here's some new definitions. Things will work better. Well, sure, they're going to work better for somebody. And they're going to work better for an industry that can basically, in Minnesota now, illegalize a legal product of raw milk. Because there's no small farm that's going to be able to, as David said, pass those kind of statutory inspections that are on the books that are meant to be grade A, grade B dairies of industrialized dairy farms that are selling to dairy plants. Now, with the new definitions, David's farm and Heidi's farm can be defined as a dairy plant. Now, subject to hundreds of statutes. Things like you can't have grass growing between your outside cement slab and your interior door. Silly things like everything has to be painted white. Maybe not silly for an industrial-sized farm that has many different relationships and many different tiers of relationships, commingling products. And so there is that need to make sure that that our population is safe from those type of connections and different industry folks that are doing those kind of behaviors, where a consumer doesn't know what they're getting or where it's coming from. However, in a single tier relationship from producer to consumer, we can be pretty sure where everything's coming from. And that's why today it's like, where do we go? And David's talked about, we need to start looking at who's in our government that is going to support us or not support us. And really look at who is going to support something like a Food Freedom Act. If anybody's familiar with the Wyoming Food Freedom Act of 2015, and it was cleaned up in 2017, basically is what we're saying in Minnesota is these things have been legal for hundreds of years. This has been the way that we've done things for hundreds of years. Raw milk. There is some history. You can go to realmilk.com. There's some history about how raw milk got a bad name in America. They sell this stuff overseas in Europe, New Zealand, in vending machines, raw milk. However, in this country, there's a huge industry that doesn't want to share any of that percentage. And so we need to codify what has always been legal up until the point in which we have created a society where regulation is the norm. And government wants to increase their net and increase their scope of power. And so we need to, in my view, the second thing, not only about who we elect, is start talking about, can we start lobbying for a Food Freedom Act similar to Wyoming's in Minnesota? Simply all Wyoming said is that all these single-tier consumer producer direct-to-consumer relations are legal, but they have to be an informed consumer. And they define informed consumer as about a 2-page act, maybe 3 pages. And an informed consumer is one that is told that the state has no licensure, inspection, or regulatory connection to this product. Therefore, you're on your own with this producer. And that's the liability laws that our country has been running on for decades and decades and decades. So that would be one thing that I would say is modeling off of a Wyoming Food Freedom Act that we could pursue here. The biggest thing is that we don't have the ability to pursue these things that are being passed in our state legislature. The legislator that passed them probably had no idea the consequence, in fact, of what these simple definition changes would occur to the small farmer. And that's who is going to shut down, is the small farmer. It's going to help the large farms, and we're not against them. But we just want to have choice. And for me, and they're noble goals, but I'm not a food freedom advocate. I'm not a raw milk dairy advocate. I am a freedom of choice, freedom of liberty advocate, because that's what I did in policing. For 15 years, it was extremely important to me that I was only doing things that I had the legal right to do, whether I knew that individual, had some kind of crime or had drugs on them. If I didn't have the ability to do that, I knew what my limitations were. The limitations that were imposed on people that were giving me temporarily rights to do certain things for society. And that's where the MDA, that I would say, has gone surpassing their limitations of authority and trying to increase their regulatory and inspection net. And so that's something that individuals, like folks in this room, are going to have to work towards. And again, codifying has always been legal, but we're going to have to put it down. And it's going to have to go through our legislatures, it's going to have to go through the people that we elect, because unelected folks are infringing upon those rights. And we all deserve the right to choose what we eat. So with that, I want to say also to Farm to Legal Defense Fund, that has almost to 100% funded their defense, I can say that the farm would not exist without them.
In Illinois, we had a similar situation starting to happen, and we formed a dairy working group, and we changed that path. Those kind of laws should not be, that's very secretive, and those shouldn't have even been allowed to be on the books. And I think that a group of very committed citizens can form a dairy working group in Minnesota just like we did, and now we had legal raw milk just like you, and then they said, oh no, now we're going to write these new rules, and so we changed it, but we had to come together. A big group of people had to start to meet with legislators and form this dialogue, and Pete knows, Pete was part of it. We had, I think we met for several years, but it worked. And I think every state, we have to be really on our guard about what's going on in these legislative bodies, and have people watching like a hawk.
Absolutely, and I mean, I am not in any way, shape, or form anti-government. I was part of government for 15 years,
Right.
and I'm a law and order guy. But when these units of government are surpassing those limitations is when it becomes concerning. And like you said, it's to the point where we have to codify it in law. We have to get the laws passed to let people know who want to widen their scope of power that know.
We had big hearings. We had hearings for raw milk, but it definitely can be done. It takes a lot of work, but I would say this has to just be spoken on the highest hills in Minnesota, know what's happening to your food.
And that's where I think tonight, these kind of talks, networking for David and Heidi, to the folks that, like yourself, that have been through it, without having to reinvent the wheel, we need to look at where are the next steps. Because we just saw what happened over a 3-year court case 4-year actually. 4-year from their first inspection, they basically went in with some language and nullified any momentum that had been gained, just with the stroke of a pen. So it shows how powerful that stroke of a pen can be back when we produce it and when we argue for it. So that's something that we asked all of you for help with, for knowledge about how to do, and that's one thing that I've talked to David about, like coming to these meetings and these conferences. This is where you have to network to get these things like you have done and been successful in, to the knowledge on how to do it. Because, you know, I was a retired cop, stay-at-home dad that was putting out some blog stuff in my down hours while the kids were in kindergarten. And that could be hard from those kind of hours. I look at David, I look at Heidi, they're running a farm, and they both have full-time jobs on top of the farm. David's building roads for logging, for the DNR. Heidi, you're home nursing, home care nursing, right? Yes. And these guys are not only doing a full-time job of keeping a farm afloat, but they're doing it on top of another full-time job. And I have tried to get David to raise his prices on milk, and he won't, simply because he's so dedicated to the people that supported him over the years. I mean, he charges $5 a gallon in California. What is it, 12? But he knows that he'll price some of his consumers out if he raises it a buck. It's a hard living up there. So I give these, you don't see the stress. You don't see the weight on Heidi's shoulders. You don't see the weight on David's shoulders up here. But I'm here to tell you it's immense. What the little part that I've done in just putting out some information for people to come to their court cases and support them and stuff is minuscule compared to what they're dealing with. And if we can help them in any way, I just encourage you to talk to them, let them know, take the cause, make it Minnesota's cause, because it's about the consumers also, not just the farmers. And if we lose it, we all lose it.
Did the Wyoming Act pass?
Yes, the 2015 Wyoming Food Freedom Act, if you Google it. Yeah, it passed in 2015, and in 2017, they cleaned up some of the language on it. One of the things about the Wyoming Food Freedom Act that I read and this is just simply from going online and looking at information about it, was that they couldn't include meat because of some other aspects of other laws that they weren't able to get off the books in Wyoming. But for all your, producer to consumer single-tier relationship, that's what they've had to do, is just simply inform the consumer that the state has no connection with licensure, inspection, or regulation of this product. Once you tell them that, or once you post that and wherever you're selling, you're free to have these, personal contracts, which are a fundamental right. And that's what the court case, in David's standpoint, they would not touch one of the constitutional arguments. Because if they did, it's a huge gate that they'd be opening.
So I'm from Ohio, and we cannot legally buy raw milk, but we can get raw milk through a herd share.
Sure.
So that's a private relationship that we have with the farmer. Essentially, we're paying rent for an animal, and then we're entitled to the product that comes from that animal. But I am very interested in the Wyoming Act that passed, and just from meeting with representatives on a different freedom issue, but the same, they are so disenchanted by how little citizens are participating in their own governmental process. And they do really respect and honor when people show up in their offices, their own constituents, and have these conversations with them. And it is very powerful, especially when you're in there and you're giving them honest, accurate information and you're talking from your heart. They can relate to you with that. You give them a reason to care, because all they're hearing from is the lobbyists. That's the only people that they see on a daily basis, because they're the ones getting paid to be there every day. We're busy, we lead lives, you guys are trying to run a farm, I work a full-time job, I have kids, but I have to find the time to go down there and talk to them what's important to me, and they respond to that. So, if anybody in this room hasn't already reached out to your legislators in your own states, whatever state you're from, do it. They want to hear from you, they honor and respect that. So, I guess just having access to that information is good, and being here together is really awesome. I'm very grateful for this time together.
Yeah, and if anybody is interested on the Minnesota situation, I've got some documents that I'd be happy to forward to anybody. If you go to that supportlakeviewnaturaldairy.org site, there's a contact me. The email is standwithfarm@outlook.com, and I will forward you the information that I've just told you. I just basically printed out some of my documents I've had from the years past to talk about this morning, or tonight. I'd be happy to, push this stuff out to you. It's what I ended up doing. Zenas Bear and David, they've spoken from a very much a constitutional aspect in court about the infringements that are going on, but it is very difficult to get a judge to rule on a constitutional issue because of how wide-ranging it can be, and they really try to, rule on narrow scope, and they don't know what the unintended consequences will be. So it seems, from what we've seen, and you can tell me if you agree, that they're very, very apprehensive, even though they asked a lot of probing questions about those constitutional aspects. And I can't think that something that is more fundamental from food choice or personal contract between two people. And when you look at the arguments, so what I did is I ended up doing basically a historical review of the statutes that were pertinent. And that's where I came to this realization that these guys aren't dealing in any kind of pervasively closely regulated industry. In fact, it was deregulated. And not only that, there's something like 7 or 8 or 9 different schemas under which people can obtain raw milk throughout the country. So how can that be closely regulated? And if it's not a closely regulated industry that he's behaving in, then they can't use AIOs, the administrative inspection orders. They would have to get an actual search warrant. And a search warrant has to be predicated on articulable evidence that somebody's been harmed. Well, those are our liability laws. In 15 years now, David and Heidi haven't told you this, is it 16 or 17 years now? However many years they've been producing raw milk, they have not had one written complaint. They've also not had one verbal complaint. But somehow, the state says that they are a safety and health hazard for the people that they are selling to.
Let me jump in 1 second. I should bring you up to date on my last inspection that was given to me by the state. Some of the violations that they found on my farm, they found a crack in my milk house floor. This is Minnesota. Show me concrete doesn't have a crack in Minnesota. They found hay in a barn.
Oh my God!
They found tractors parked near a milking facility. Now there's a wall and there's barns and there's more barns. They found cats on this dairy farm. They said that they could see cows from where we milk cows. They said that there were a couple of cows that had manure on the side of their body. This was in March. I don't know, 48 different violations. If that's a violation, we might as well just give up right now.
But those violations you can see, those are geared towards a large industry. And that's fine for the large industry, but they're putting small farmers out of business. So we'll stay around for questions. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Hopefully I wasn't too 100-foot elevation